Hello, everybody. Great. So maybe we can start by you guys introducing yourselves, a couple of words about your backgrounds. What did you do before your current positions and about your companies?
So I'll start. Hi, everybody. My name is Dima Stopel. Pleasure being here. So as you have introduced me, I'm in charge of the R&D at Twistlock. At Twistlock, we are basically two co-founders. My partner, his name is Ben. He's the CEO. And I'm in charge of the R&D center here in Israel. Before that, I worked at Microsoft for 9 years. I started as a developer, then moved to a management position. My whole life, I was interested in security. And at Microsoft, most of my career was around enterprise security. And my partners as well, so it was clear that if we do startup, it will be around enterprise security because we don't have any chance in anything else. That's it.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Lazada. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for ZocDoc. ZocDoc is one of the largest startups in New York right now. Think of ZocDoc as kind of like the open table for healthcare. So you could actually go online and actually book a doctor real time. We're a cloud-first company. We actually were on-prem first and migrated over to the cloud over the last few years. Prior to ZocDoc, I was the Chief Information Security Officer for Condé Nast, which is like Vogue, GQ, Allure, Vanity Fair, big media company. Prior to that, I was head of security for Sony Music. So I was in media for a very long time. And then many moons ago, I was in the military. I came from the Marine Corps, and my background is also security.
Great. So today's discussion is about cloud native security. So maybe we'll start with why do you think it justifies its own category? I mean, what is cloud native security, and why do we need to buy solutions that are dedicated to this category?
Okay. So first, it's a new emerging market, and I think any emerging market deserves its own opportunity. But I guess as a technical person, I have some more technical answer that I believe in. One of the main differences between cloud native and the old-fashioned way of running and deploying software is that cloud native uses entities that are small, minimalistic, declarative, and immutable. And that enables doing other, in my opinion, better kind of security than what was possible before, because any entity is, as I said, is more minimal, declarative, and it's much easier to define it in its own profile and detect any deviation from this profile. Something that was very hard to do with traditional huge and fat VMs and so on. And we have a product in such category, and we see more and more competitors in the same category as well. So I think this is the strongest sign that this is something else. And when we speak to customers, and even in the very early stage, like 3.5 years ago, it was clear to everybody that cloud native deserves a different security solution, that like taking something traditional won't work. So yeah, that's my take on this.
Thank you. I think for us as a customer or somebody that's actually in the cloud or moving to the cloud, you can't take traditional on-prem solutions and try to adapt them into the cloud. They just don't work. You think about how businesses run today, you're either in the cloud, you're thinking of going to the cloud, or you're going to start in the cloud, right? So you have to actually put security ahead of that into your design. And cloud native security is its own feature because of the way the world is right now. ZocDoc, we started on-prem, and then as we started migrating over to the cloud, we had to look at tools to help us migrate and manage the risk of going to the cloud and actually being in the cloud. Without solutions like Twistlock or even some of the cloud features that the cloud providers offer, if you don't take advantage of those, you put yourself at a huge disadvantage, huge risk. But you can't take something that was on-prem and say, I'm going to run this in the cloud. It just doesn't work. It doesn't adapt to how you're trying to do things from an entrepreneurial perspective, Most people are in the cloud because of velocity, right? You want to do things quickly, you want to build quick, you want to fail quick, right? You can't take on-prem things and do those in the cloud. It's just going to limit your innovation, limit your ability to do things in a quick way.
So maybe you can expand on this, because when you decided to move to the cloud from on-prem, or started, to build infrastructure, or just do the whole transition, when did security become an issue? And did you think security before you did that transition?
Great question. It wasn't an issue, thankfully. We did security by design. We actually built our cloud environment with security in mind. We didn't do a lift and shift and then try to adapt security into it. We made sure security was embedded throughout the entire life cycle of our move. So from understanding simple things like the shared responsibility model for the cloud. When folks move to the cloud, they think the risk is in the cloud, it's on them, it's not on you. You have to understand that shared responsibility model. Once you understand that model, like where the risk is versus the cloud provider versus you, then you could put solution, take advantage of tools, and use some of the cloud native tools to actually minimize and address that risk. So security was embedded throughout the entire process.
And I'm sure that it's a huge deal because you're in the healthcare industry. So maybe we can talk a bit about that, because it's such a sensitive industry, specifically in the era of GDPR, but also in general. So how does it differentiate in terms of you thinking security in your transition through your career to the healthcare industry?
Great question. So healthcare is highly regulated. The other thing with healthcare is it's incredibly slow and archaic. If you look at the healthcare industry, you look at hospitals, you look at pharma, their technology is old, right? And then when you get a disruptive startup like ZocDoc that says we're going to take 7 million patients a month that book with us and put their data on the cloud, everybody gets kind of nervous. So explaining that is one. Two, taking advantage of the HIPAA compliant services that the cloud providers offer was key for us, right? We don't innovate, we don't put any of our products on top of any of those services that aren't already HIPAA compliant, so we get past that. But you bring up like GDPR, which is new, right? It's came into effect May 25th of this year. Everybody was going crazy about it. AWS said, hey, now most of our services are GDPR compliant. But we still have to think about, as things are progressing and we want to spin out into new products and do things, keeping these regulations in mind before they actually get built, before the products actually get built, is how we get ahead of a lot of things. Early in my career, too, like the first time I started dealing with the cloud was the day that Michael Jackson died. I was at Sony Music. So if you guys remember that, it was 2009. The cloud was around for like 4 or 5 years. The only reason that MichaelJackson.com didn't go down was because it was on EC2 and we were able to handle all of that traffic. And I've seen the evolution of the cloud from just being out there for traffic and using it for front-end workloads to actually operating entire environments now. It's a good thing. It's helped with innovation. A lot more startups have popped up because of the cloud, and I think it's going to continue. But the good thing is security is now starting to get woven into the cloud a lot more. You look at the big three cloud providers, they all have these services that are baked in right off the bat. Encryption off the bat, GDPR right off the bat, HIPAA. 5 years ago, that wasn't thought like that. They didn't even think about that. They just wanted to put tools and products out there so that consumers could take advantage of it and start building on it. But now they're starting to think about security as that first layer before adoption comes in from customers.
So it's an interesting observation. Dima, do you feel the same when you're dealing with customers, that security becomes the first layer, and people, before they move to the cloud or in general, are thinking first security before they do that move?
Yes, and if I look like a couple of years back, I mean, it started with people only just start touching Docker and learn the technology. And back then, like 3-4 years ago, we saw that I mean, people, as I mentioned, people understood, companies understood that the security solution should be different, but the requirements from the security solution were more or less the same, like from the typical security product, like make sure I don't have malware and help me with access control. But with time, when the deployments become bigger and customer move to orchestration systems like Kubernetes and OpenShift and so on, and they learn the technology in a more deeper way, they understood that they need more. And then we started to get, actually we innovated with some features in the product that are relevant to cloud native environments only, like inter-cluster communication enforcement or runtime security and so on. So there was some evolution in this space, especially in the cloud native area. Yeah.
Maybe you can talk about a bit about the report that you just released. So Twistlock, I don't know if you saw. By the way, if you have questions, feel free. Let's make it a an interactive discussion. If you have a question, that's not wait to the end. But you released a report, Twistlock, saying that 60% of cloud-native services are not kept up to date, and 90% of attacks are automatically executed against outdated code and known CVEs, which is pretty scary. So maybe you can share more insights about that.
Sure. So indeed, we released the report, and basically we did two experiments to collect the data. One was to take few most popular cloud-native applications, like from Docker Hub, and scan the internet and see how many of those are exposed to the internet, and if they're exposed to the internet, how many of those are either outdated or contain some known vulnerabilities. So that's one experiment. Another one that we did is basically creating honeypots that mimic the behavior of the same applications with the same vulnerabilities and see what kind of attacks do we see. And what we saw is like Iran mentioned, we saw that 60% of applications, of cloud-native applications in the internet were outdated. 25 contained known vulnerabilities. And from the honeypots, we saw that there's a huge number of automatic attacks constantly bombarding whatever they can. And there are quite a few attacks that are specific to these applications, to cloud native stuff. So I can assume that out of these 25% that had some known vulnerabilities, I would assume that 100% of them are actually exploited. And what we also saw is that vast majority of the automatic attacks actually coming from Chinese IPs, which is not that surprising, at least. But that's the report, yeah. So basically, the bottom line of the report is just like make sure that your application are patched, and specifically just to emphasize one point to guys who use cloud native. It's different because if you take like a typical VM, in a typical VM you have this process that makes sure that your VM is updated, and if it's not, it alerts you. Within the container, you usually have only the application running, and there is nothing to verify that there is a problem, like you have a Heartbleed. So you can run with Heartbleed like for years without knowing it. So make sure you run whatever product that gives you this visibility.
So it actually brings me to another question. You talked about specific security issues within cloud native. So are there other security issues that you see that are very unique to cloud native, the cloud native stack and applications and in general? And it's a question to Brian as well, of course.
Let me take that. I think the biggest thing, misconfiguration, which leads to security vulnerabilities. I think that is the biggest thing that we face with, at least at ZocDoc. We have 150 developers all operating independently. We want them to operate quickly, so we give them keys to the kingdom when it comes to AWS. We try to use things like Twistlock to limit our risk when they're deploying containers and stuff like that. But when they spin things up, I mean, we want them to be creative and innovative, but sometimes they do things quickly and it leads to misconfiguration, leaving endpoints open to the internet and stuff like that. Sometimes it's hard for us to catch that quickly. I think that's one of the biggest things with cloud native apps is that you're giving the developer a lot of power, right? We want to give them a lot of power for innovation, but it does, if you don't balance that risk with some sort of tool to visualize it, block it, remediate, you can open yourself up to a lot.
Yeah.
One more point, just something that surprised me. I discovered Bitcoin more or less early when it was still possible to mine some Bitcoins with GPU. And but still, I couldn't imagine how popular a crypto mining related attacks would be. I mean, we see it a lot. We see the attack of trying to implant crypto miner within customer environment just to get some more computational resources is something that becomes more and more popular, and it surprised me. So it's not
really
just relevant to cloud native, but a general trend that we see.
So we have a really interesting combination here of a customer and a vendor. So maybe we can talk a bit about that. I mean, Dima, if you can ask your customer one question, what will it be? Pretend that Brian is not here. Well, pretend that Brian represents all customers. And we have here, a lot of entrepreneurs in the crowd. What question would you like to ask customers? Even, before when they are reviewing your product or afterwards, what will it be?
So I'm the R&D guy, and so and I'm usually in the back office. I'm not allowed to speak to customers. But to me, the most important thing, and I guess in general, but in the end of the day is customer satisfaction. So I would ask if you're happy.
We are happy. I think that's.
Thank you.
That's what I think when it comes to partnerships between a customer and a solution or a vendor. The big thing for me is having transparency. So you're in charge of R&D. So as you start expanding into, we're looking at this, or we want to do X, we want to do Y, getting that customer feedback, making me feel valued, saying I'm going to give you that feedback. It's going to help you innovate, and you're solving my problem, right? I think that sometimes vendors come out with solutions without getting any of that consumer input, and it might help 2 or 3 customers instead of the broader range. So I think getting that feedback from us and making it a true partnership, we value that. As a CISO, I value that. I do not partner with anybody that doesn't view me as a true partner, wants my input, not just my check.
So do you
We really want your feedback, and we will do it.
So do you see a difference, Brian, between working with like extremely early stage vendors and more mature ones in terms of customer attention?
Great question. I like working with early stage because they give you more attention, right? The more established companies or the more established vendors, it all depends on, honestly, how much you're paying them. If you pay them a lot, you're going to get a lot of attention. If you're not paying them enough, you're not going to get their attention, right? I like working with the early stage startups because, one, they appreciate our feedback. Yep. 2, we see direct results from our feedback in the product quickly versus more established companies. And I think it gives us, on the security side, internally as a consumer, it gives us that innovative spirit as well. Because we're looking at this tool and we're saying they're innovating, they're doing things quickly. How can we get creative with it in our environment as well? So I think it's just a good synergy when you work with early stage startups.
So another follow-up question, maybe for Dima this time. You were once a young entrepreneur and you started your company a few years ago, and now you're a more or less, growth stage startup. And you have here a lot of entrepreneurs and some investors that would really appreciate your input as on that journey. And are there things that you did or the company did a few years ago that today you were like, maybe I should have done something different? Like, what's your biggest input when young entrepreneurs come, and ask you, how should I build my roadmap or other stuff like that?
I can check something that I think we actually did good. We did a lot of mistakes, but I think something that we did good is that we created a company with the goal of making the company succeed versus the goal of making the specific idea succeed. And I personally, I do see companies that try hard to make some specific idea succeed, and we're a good example. I mean, we started thinking about the idea half a year before starting Twistlog. And we invested in investigating different markets and so on, and like a lot of markets. And we come up with some idea, which is not cloud native security at all. And we started going to talk to different people, and including VCs and so on. And basically people told us the idea sucks. And we said, well, we need to change it. So we changed it to something else, which sucked as well. And then we moved to cloud native security. And this goal of just we need to succeed no matter with what idea, I think it had a very positive influence on us. And maybe some one additional tip, something that a myth that I would like to debunk, which is basically is that you can meet a VC only once, and if you get rejected, you cannot go to this VC again. So while invested in us in the seed round, and we met them several times, including with ideas that sucked, and it's totally okay. And I would even encourage this because this helps you to validate your ideas. So, yeah.
That's a great advice, actually. So, Brian, you talked about working with early stage startups, already working with them. What catches your eye? How can I convince you to meet with me if I'm an early stage entrepreneur?
Great question. As CISOs, we have vendor fatigue right now because every vendor in the world, they're doing something that's going to solve my problem, right? So I think what catches my eye is two things. If they're solving a gap that currently exists out there in the market, right? They could say, we're using blockchain to do X, Y, and Z. Great, everybody's using blockchain, but how do you operationalize it and make it effective in my security program, right? I don't want the key phrases or the catchy things. I want the things that are going to really solve that gap that I have. That's one. Two, the innovation side of it, right? When I go to RSA and I go to like Black Hat, I actually go to the vendors that are on the outside of the booth because they can't pay enough to be in the middle. So those are the ones that are going to be taking a risk. They're thinking about something out of the box. They're more innovative. And look, 10% of a bad idea is a good idea. There's good in it, right? So those are the ones that I like to look at because they're trying to be disruptive and not try to go with the flow and you know, just try to go out there to, you know, reinforce their gut feeling. They're actually trying to build a company. So I think that's key for me. It's just I want somebody that's going to be just as disruptive as I want to be in the space.
So do you think that the majority of CISOs will say the same answer?
Unfortunately not. Like it depends on the vertical that the CISO's in. If you go to financial services, they're a little bit different than somebody like a technology healthcare startup, right? We think completely different. You know, they're going to think more structured, they want vendors that are more established. They don't want to take the risk of going with a startup that possibly could get either acquired or go out of business in 2 years, right? They don't want to take that risk. Versus me, I like risk. I mean, my job as a CISO is to reduce risk, so I'm willing to take a risk on a vendor.
So that's actually a great way to ask my next question about post-acquisition. So we talked a bit about this in Black Hat when we did our dinner. And it's a really interesting question that is not being discussed, I think, at all. So you're working with early stage startups and you're considering yourself a partner with them and they might get acquired a year from now, a year and a half from now, 2 years from now. Is this something that you're thinking about when you're working with them? And after they're acquired, how does the relationship look? And you know, how does it evolve over time?
Great question. I think it is something I am thinking about. It's the end goal for all startups, right? It's either to be acquired or you know, IPO, but I think what I'm thinking about is establishing that partnership early on is important because even if during the acquisition we're going to be notified. I think that's one. The second piece is the acquiring company. Who are they? What have they done with other companies they've acquired? Have they continued to invest in R&D? Do they value the customer? Those are the type of things that I want that transparency. And as a customer, I would expect it. Does it happen all the time? Probably not. And when that doesn't happen, that's when CISOs like myself, we start looking at alternatives and saying, we were only there to be part of your logo, portfolio company. We were part of you know, helping you grow. But ones that are transparent and share that, I stick with them, right? But the key thing is the acquiring company, how much are they going to continue to invest in R&D and the customer relationship.
So do you think it discourages CISOs to work with early stage startups because of that dynamics that happens after acquisition?
It depends on the CISO. I usually ask startups, how far along are you? Where are you in your process? What series are you? Because it's going to help me gather and say, this is where they're at. 18 months from now, they're going to be here. If they continue to grow, I'll know. And then I could project my program and even budget my program based on if in 2 years they get acquired and I need to leave because they get acquired by a company that's not going to invest, I'll have alternatives, right? So it's always gathering that information up front so that I can continue to plan.
So anyone have questions? That's a great time to ask. Yep.
Question for Brian.
Yep.
Brian, what's your top three problems on your mind?
Top three problems. First is talent. There's a talent shortage in cybersecurity right now. I don't have enough qualified folks to fill the open roles that I have right now. By 2020, I think there's going to be 2 million unfilled jobs in cyber alone in the U.S. So it's very hard to get talent and then to retain them. I might be able to hire somebody. 6 months later, they get poached, right? So that's a big thing for me. The lack of automation in security. If you look at the security space for the past 25 years, we've been doing the same stuff, expecting different results. I think there's automatic alerting now, great. Automatic monitoring, great. Investigation and remediation, not there. Why isn't it there? Why isn't automatic remediation being thought of, right? I don't want to spend the little bit of resources that I have from a human capital perspective investigating something and remediating it over 4 or 5 days when I could have a tool, a platform, a solution that could actually do it for me. That is something that it bothers me a lot that we haven't thought about that in the industry and taken and forced companies to actually innovate a little bit more on that. And the last thing is the lack of intelligence sharing between governments and the private sector. If you look at all companies right now, we're a target of nation states. It's a known fact. A company like myself, 7 security professionals on the team, we're going to lose that battle against a nation state every day of the week. If I had more intelligence sharing with the government, I could allocate my resources appropriate to the attacks that are coming towards healthcare or towards ZocDoc. Those 3 things I think would help CISOs like myself regulate our program a little bit more to help actually protect our patients.
Other questions?
Love it.
Here's the situation. You're a CISO, you find a conference, an exotic, I don't know, Hawaii, whatever. You go on around on the beach, go surfing. You're in a room full of CISOs. As a healthcare CISO, one is when you're talking to your other colleagues, what are some of the challenges that faces you specifically in healthcare that they don't see, that they'll be saying, my God, thank God we're not in that field? And the second follow-up is, not only are these the problems we face, but these are some of the unique challenges we face when it comes to IoT healthcare within the home of a personal person.
Great question. So the first one, I would say things that the healthcare space faces from HIPAA law is one, it was written, I'd say for the US specifically, it was written in 1996. It was put into effect in 2005. This is before any sort of cloud technology was actually adopted for consumer use. I think that's the biggest one. So when we have to actually migrate to the cloud, explaining things to our auditors and how to say this is something that is HIPAA compliant was incredibly challenging. I think that's one. 2, the amount of data that we take in from our patients, right? How much is one healthcare record worth on the black market right now? Just one record. $380. So, and I get 7 million a month. So we have that. Other industries don't want to have that risk. They're saying you're taking 7 million a month versus financial services is a little bit more. I mean, they're going after the money, but it's not. They're actually going after identities and personal information. So I think that's it. The other thing is, threat actors look at ZocDoc and they say, why go after one hospital when I can go after a company that has 100 of the top hospitals across the country on their platform? So we have that heightened risk. I think that's the biggest thing. And your second question? IoT. So in the medical, here's something that's interesting about medical devices, right? If you look at policies that govern medical devices in the US, there's a law that each medical device has to have a serial number on it. But there's no law that says that that device has to have a firmware upgrade. There's a problem there, right? The government hasn't figured out that they need cyber professionals helping them write policy to force these medical device manufacturers to actually incorporate this into their builds. So there's a few startups that have popped up now specifically around medical device cyber. Think of a scenario of pacemakers or in the middle of a heart transplant, somebody takes over that and says, give me 5 million in Bitcoin or I'm going to shut this person's heart off, right? That reality exists, right? And the fact that there's medical devices out there that don't have that protection or even networks that are protecting that is a serious risk and that, you know, the government needs to start thinking about.
Other questions? I have a question, Dima. So it's a really interesting model what you have in Twistlock in terms of geography. You have, you know, the R&D here in Israel. You have headquarters in New York. You have others, you know, in the Midwest. So how do you manage that? And you know, you make it work in Twistlock. So it's a really interesting model. And you know, Israelis will have to have a distributed model no matter what, but your model is even more distributed. So what's your insights about that?
Well, the honest answer is that we have found some great sales and marketing guys in Portland, so it became a headquarters. And eventually, Ben moved to New York. My partner, he moved to New York, and he connects the two sites. To me, it was eventually it becomes clear that the decision of Ben, like of the CEO, of the business person, to move to US, as opposed to fly to US occasionally, it's a right decision, especially for someone who is the first-time CEO, and for founders that create that found startup for the first time. He moved. He found these guys in Portland, and we got headquarters there, and we made it work. We had some situation that we had to make it work, and it works good actually. Yeah. But yeah.
So it works, and in terms of advice for, you know, entrepreneurs that need to, you know, the CEO moves to the US and they need to communicate, are there any tips that you can give to how does it work?
The most important thing is people. So wherever you find great people, or especially the C-level that you need to hire, you need just to go with it and make it work whenever they are. In our case, it was Portland.
Yeah. Great. So thank you very much to you both. It was great.